My name is Eleanor Bishop. I'm 46 years old, and for over 2 decades, I served as a cyber operations officer in the United States Army. 25 years in a sealed world of encryption, threat analysis, and secrets no one was supposed to know. I wore a badge most people couldn't pronounce and carried the weight of missions that didn't officially exist. But none of that prepared me for what happened in that courtroom. I remember the chill in the air that morning, August, but it felt like winter. I stood at attention in full uniform, the only sound in the room coming from the soft hum of overhead lights and the subtle rustle of legal folders. Across from me sat my family. My parents' stone-faced eyes down. My younger brother Dylan, hands folded neatly, tie perfect. His wife Tessa perched beside him like a portrait. They looked like a family in mourning. They were. Just not for the reasons anyone assumed. Their lawyer was already speaking. She called me unstable, said I had abused my authority while in uniform, claimed I'd coerced my parents into signing over assets. She cited my deployment history as proof that I'd grown disconnected from reality. I said nothing. Not when they demanded my share of the estate. Not when they questioned my mental capacity. Not when my own mother nodded silently in agreement. I didn't flinch, because I had come prepared. When it was my turn, I didn't argue. I reached into my case and pulled out a single sheet of paper. 1 page. No theatrics. No long speeches. Just quiet, deliberate motion. I walked toward the bench. The judge glanced at me, surprised. I placed the page gently in front of him and said, "Your Honor, with your permission, I believe this should be read before anything else continues." He lifted the paper. His eyes moved. Once, then twice. Then they stopped. A shift spread across his face, cold, immediate. He looked to the bailiff. "Close the doors," he said. And just like that, everything changed. It came in a cream-colored envelope, thick and smooth, heavier than normal mail. No return address, just my full name typed in clean serif letters, centered like it belonged to someone else. I stood in the hallway for a long moment before opening it, the envelope resting in my palm like it carried something toxic. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking across the street, a lawnmower 2 doors down. Everything outside felt ordinary. Inside, my pulse slowed to a quiet crawl. I broke the seal with a paring knife and unfolded the first page. Bishop Family Trust. Notice of Civil Filing Plaintiff, Mr. Dylan R. Bishop. Defendants, Miss Eleanor M. Bishop. Claims undue influence, misuse of power of attorney, emotional distress, financial exploitation. I didn't move. For a full minute, I simply stared at the words, trying to make them rearrange into something that made sense. But they didn't change. They were precise, calculated like a tactical strike. Then I read it again, slower this time. My younger brother, whom I had helped put through college, whose first car I'd co-signed for, was accusing me of manipulating our parents for financial gain. Claiming that I had exploited them during my leaves from deployment, used my military standing to intimidate and isolate them. Accusing me of turning the family estate into a personal war chest. I walked to the kitchen, laid the packet flat on the table, and turned on the kettle. Boil water. Breathe. Boil water. Breathe. It's what we were trained to do. When something explodes, find the stillness first. The smell of chamomile didn't help much. I sat down with my mug and flipped through the attached documents, printouts of bank transfers, screenshots of trust agreements, all marked up with highlighter and red pen arrows. There were even transcripts from supposed wellness checks done at the house, implying I was isolating my parents. And every one of them was signed by people I didn't know. No, not people I didn't know. People Tessa knew. She used to work in behavioral services at a veteran care center before she married Dylan. She'd mentioned starting her own practice, just helping families navigate trauma, she'd said once, all soft smiles and warm tones. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now I realized I should have. My eyes lingered on one email thread stapled into the stack. It was between my mother and a family advisor, praising Dylan for stepping in and managing the estate with clarity, unlike Eleanor. There was a timestamp. 2 months before I'd returned from Germany. I didn't remember being consulted. I didn't remember being asked to step back. I remembered showing up for dinner and finding the locks changed. That was 6 weeks ago. I thought we were just having a rough patch. I thought we'd circle back. But this wasn't just distance. It was a surgical removal. My name had been pried loose from our family records, our shared property, our legal history. Quietly, efficiently, while I was still wearing the uniform and serving overseas. And now they were coming for the rest of it, with lawyers. At first I reached for my phone, then stopped. Who was I going to call? My parents? Dylan? Someone at JAG? No. I knew better. I'd seen how silence worked in war zones, how well lies thrived when no one dared speak truth. And now I was in one of my own. That evening I drove past the house. I didn't stop, didn't pull into the driveway. Just drove by. The porch light was on. Someone had planted a new flower bed. The hedges had been trimmed. There was a car I didn't recognize parked out front. It didn't look like my home anymore. Not really. I sat in my car for a while, the engine ticking softly beneath the summer night air, and thought about the last Thanksgiving we spent there. I'd brought German chocolates, and Dylan had teased me, said I was trying too hard. Tessa had made a comment about career women overcompensating, and Mom just smiled like it was all harmless banter. It hadn't felt harmless. I realized something then, sitting behind the wheel. This wasn't a sudden ambush. This had been planned. Maybe not from the beginning, but close enough. Quiet decisions made while I was gone. Conversations held in low voices behind closed doors. Shifts in language tone and loyalty. And I, so proud of my independence, so certain I didn't need constant check-ins, had missed every warning sign. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with all the lights off and let the dark press in around me. I reread the pages until they blurred, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt even in war zones. I felt disposable. Not as a soldier, as a daughter. They weren't just erasing me from the estate. They were rewriting our entire family history without me. And I knew deep down they thought I would stay silent. They didn't know me at all. They had already sold my childhood home. The first thing that struck me wasn't the sale itself. It was the name on the deed. Alara Strategic Holdings, LLC. I found it buried in the county property database 2 days after the lawsuit arrived. I had been digging not for revenge, not even for justice yet, but for clarity. I wanted to know when exactly my name had vanished from the records tied to the Bishop family trust. I didn't expect to discover that the house I grew up in, white brick colonial 2 stories wraparound porch, where my dad taught me how to tie knots, and my mother hosted Easter brunch, was no longer owned by any of us. It had been transferred quietly 3 months prior. No announcement, no family conversation. Just a line of legal language signed by Howard and Vivian Bishop, notarized and filed. But the buyer, that name, Alara. It was almost poetic in its cruelty. A variation of my name stripped and repurposed as the corporate alias that now owned our house. I stared at the document for a long time, the pale blue header of the county site, glowing back at me like an accusation. A quick search pulled up the LLC registration, no phone number, no website. Just a P.O. box, and one listed manager, Dylan R. Bishop. The breath caught in my throat, but I didn't react. Not visibly. I had been trained for worse than this, but inside something was starting to fracture. That afternoon I drove to the house, not in uniform, not to make a scene, just to see it with my own eyes. I parked 2 doors down and approached on foot, slow, controlled. The rose bushes were gone, replaced by some designer landscaping that looked straight out of a real estate brochure. The old porch swing had been replaced with a sleeker bench, one of those modern composite ones that never creaked. Through the window, I could see someone moving, Dylan. He was in the living room, lounging in Dad's old recliner, like it had always belonged to him. Tessa sat cross-legged on the couch beside him, scrolling through her phone. She was laughing at something. They looked comfortable, at ease, settled, like I'd never existed. I rang the doorbell. Dylan answered with a beer in one hand, and a look of polite confusion, like I was some distant cousin who'd shown up at the wrong address. "Ellie," he said flatly, as if the syllables tasted bad. "Didn't know you were in town." I held up a printout of the deed transfer folded neatly in thirds. He didn't even glance at it. "That's a business thing," he said. "Dad and Mom signed off. You weren't around, wasn't a big deal." I stepped across the threshold uninvited. The room smelled different now, scented candles and new leather instead of old wood and lemon oil. I looked around, careful not to touch anything. Not a big deal, I asked. Tessa stood up, her smile sweet but sterile. Eleanor, I think maybe you're taking this the wrong way. You've been under a lot of stress. You've done so much for the country. We thought maybe it was time to make things simpler. For the family, Dylan added like it explained everything. I turned to my mother, who was seated in the corner armchair, knitting slowly, like none of this was happening. She looked up at me, eyes tired, and said nothing. Tessa's right, she murmured finally, not meeting my eyes. It's just business, sweetheart. Dylan explained everything. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the paper. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stood there, a grown woman in civilian clothes with calluses on her palms, from combat gear medals in a locked drawer at home, and nothing left to hold in this house that once felt sacred. Something shifted behind my ribs. A small, quiet tilt of gravity. I turned and walked out. No one followed. No one asked me to stay. Outside, the wind was picking up. It pushed against my back like it wanted me gone faster. When I got to the car, I sat behind the wheel and stared at the front door for 5 full minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just rewound the moment in my head over and over. The way Dylan had dismissed me without hesitation. The way Tessa's tone had dripped with gentle gaslighting. The way my mother's hands never stopped moving, knitting as if busy hands could justify a quiet betrayal. I drove away without looking back. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with the printout still on the kitchen table. I kept reading the buyer name over and over, Elara Strategic Holdings. They had used a ghost of my name to erase me. I thought I understood betrayal. I let them win publicly, while I investigated in silence. I didn't make a statement. Not to the press, not to my unit, not even to the people who reached out in quiet disbelief. The first article went up 3 days after the lawsuit was filed. The headline read, Decorated Army Intelligence Officer Sued by Family for Financial Abuse. They used an old military photo, black and white hard shadows across my jawline. I looked stern, cold. The kind of image that made their story believable. It spread fast, local at first, then national. Within a week, I was a walking scandal. Grocery store clerks stared too long. Former colleagues sent me awkward texts that ended with things like thinking of you or hope it all works out. A few friends went silent altogether. I didn't blame them. I had been trained to operate in shadows, to move with precision and purpose. But nothing prepares you for the kind of invisibility that happens when people you once trusted stop looking you in the eye. The Army offered me administrative leave time to handle personal matters. I didn't protest. I didn't explain. I just accepted it with a nod and packed up my desk that same afternoon. When I left the base, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I had stepped into a fog where nothing had form, and everyone spoke in half-truths. So I disappeared on purpose. I went home, shut the blinds, and turned off every alert on my phone. And then I began to dig. Not out of vengeance, out of instinct. The trust transfer had been executed under a legal clause called simplified succession, a mechanism I remembered flagging once in a government fraud case years earlier. It was clean, fast, and dangerous in the wrong hands. All it required was a document certifying mental unfitness of a trust holder, co-signed by a qualified counselor. That counselor, Tessa Bishop, M.A., LPC, licensed professional counselor. I found her name on the state registry. Registered only a year earlier. Her business website looked professional, muted blues, inspirational quotes, smiling photos of veterans and families. Supporting those who serve was the tagline, but the list of credentials was vague. Her client list was hidden behind privacy walls. I opened an encrypted spreadsheet I hadn't touched since Kandahar. Started mapping, names, dates, overlaps. There were too many coincidences, too many veterans I recognized from retirement ceremonies, from VA clinics, from long-ago missions. Men and women with real trauma, and some who had been dead for years. Their names were tied to benefit claims, grant applications, tax write-offs, all routed through Elara Strategic Holdings. And every form had one thing in common: someone had signed on behalf of the veteran. Most of those someones were connected directly or indirectly to Tessa's counseling practice. I sat there for hours in the dark. The only light coming from my screen, my fingers tapping like a metronome through endless tabs of digital rot. They weren't just moving money, they were building a machine. Identity theft layered in compassion, fraud disguised as therapy. And they were using me, my security clearance, my family name, my deployment records, as the foundation. At first I thought I was going crazy, that I was connecting dots that weren't there, seeing ghosts, because I needed something to hold on to. But the data was too clean, too perfect, too intentional. That week I didn't return calls. I didn't reply to the Army liaison who asked if I needed support. I didn't answer when Dylan emailed me a one-line message. "We don't have to let this get ugly, Ellie." I saved the message, didn't respond. I was done talking. Because talking gave them space to twist my words, to shape a version of the truth that suited them. Instead, I went quiet, focused, cold. Each night I mapped their system. Each morning I walked 2 miles in silence. Each afternoon I sifted through trust documents, grant funding records, license renewals. I traced where the veterans' benefits went, where the shell companies lived, where the cash turned to silence. And one night I saw it, a payment trail that looped through an offshore account registered in the Bahamas, before resurfacing under the name of a nonprofit run by Tessa. The name was familiar, Hearts Forward Foundation. I'd seen it on a brochure in a VA clinic 3 years ago. I remembered because it used my photo, one I'd never approved, one from a retirement benefit ceremony taken by a reporter I didn't know. I stared at it on the brochure, frozen in place. They hadn't just removed me from the family, they had turned me into a brand. And while I stayed silent, they had built an entire fraud operation on the illusion of my credibility. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I shut my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling until my vision blurred. This wasn't about a house. It wasn't even about family anymore. This was war. And I was done playing defense. Even the people I saved now believed their lies. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from absence, from doors that stop opening, calls that go unanswered, glances that flick away just a little too quickly. That's the silence I walked into after the headlines. At first, it was just tension. The way my old CO paused before replying to my email. The way one of my former team leads at Fort Braddock closed his laptop a little too quickly when I walked into the admin office to return my badge. The way my neighbor Marine Corps 2 tours nodded at me without a word and then turned to head back inside. Then came the absences. The cafe where I used to get breakfast every Thursday. Suddenly no more smiles from the barista, no more. On your usual, just a curt name and a receipt handed without eye contact. A message from a former subordinate. "Sorry, Colonel. Probably best we don't meet right now." Optics, I knew. That's what made it worse. Because optics are everything in the military world, and once they turn on you, no amount of truth gets you clean again. The news had painted me as the fallen soldier, the unhinged daughter, the war hero who cracked and lashed out at her own blood. The media didn't care about truth. They cared about symmetry, and the story they liked best was the one where I had become what the battlefield couldn't broken. By week 2, I had stopped going out altogether. I ordered groceries online, moved my morning walks to 4 a.m. to avoid the neighbors. When I did go out for supplies, I wore a cap low over my face and paid in cash. But the hardest part wasn't strangers, it was the people who should have known better. A retired major I'd once pulled out of a diplomatic mess in Turkey blocked me on LinkedIn. A Navy vet I'd mentored through a PTSD spiral stopped answering my texts. Even Janet, who once called me her battle sister, unfriended me on every platform. It wasn't loud. No accusations, no fights, just silence. Like I had ceased to exist. I sat in my apartment one evening, lights dimmed, watching the late news cycle rehash the same story, court case, heating up in Bishop Estate dispute. Former Army officer refuses to comment. The commentator smirked at the camera and said, "You'd think someone with that much clearance would be better at covering her tracks." They all laughed. I turned off the TV. There's a difference between isolation and exile. Isolation is when you choose distance. Exile is when they choose it for you. And I was living in exile, cut off not just from family or command, but from the very community I had spent my life defending. I didn't crumble, but something in me settled. A kind of finality. This wasn't just a smear campaign. It was working. They had weaponized perception, and it was costing me everything I had built. That night I went into the basement. I hadn't opened the footlocker in years. It still smelled like the desert canvas and sand and old adrenaline. Inside were things no one else knew. I'd kept a field diary from my first tour in Kandahar, a blood-stained commendation I never framed, a folded photo of my team at Bagram, all of us grinning like we believed it would last. I pulled out the sealed envelope I'd stored there and opened it for the first time in a decade. Inside was a list. Names of soldiers who had come to me for help quietly off the record, off the books, because they trusted me. Because I never broke when things got ugly, I traced their names with my fingertip. Some were gone now, but some were still out there, still watching, still listening. I didn't need the world to believe me. I just needed the right people to. The next morning, I reached out to one of them. Encrypted line, no identifiers, just a message. I have something. Big. Need quiet ears and sharper eyes. The reply came within minutes. Send coordinates. I'm in. Just like that, I wasn't alone anymore, not publicly, but where it mattered, in the shadows, where truth doesn't need applause, just proof. This was no longer about inheritance. The moment it shifted was subtle. I was reviewing grant filings from Tessa's nonprofit when I noticed a familiar name buried in a PDF. Staff Sergeant Malik Granger. Army retired. We'd served together in Ramadi. He was injured in a drone strike and medically discharged. Except Malik was dead. Had been for 5 years. I'd gone to his funeral. So how was he listed as the recipient of a $25,000 community reintegration grant, funded by the Hearts Forward Foundation? Last quarter, I opened the file again. The signature wasn't his. The handwriting wasn't even close. The date on the intake form, 2 weeks after the house was transferred out of the Bishop Trust. A cold, slow breath filled my lungs. This wasn't just about getting rid of me. This was a system. And they were using the names of real soldiers, some dead, some alive, to funnel money through fake counseling sessions into shell nonprofits, and then into real estate and brokerage accounts under Dylan's business. I clicked deeper. The file metadata on one of the documents showed it was created on a laptop registered to a Wi-Fi address on Hawthorne Street, Tessa's office. I cross-checked another record, same pattern. The falsified documents were being generated in the very office where she claimed to provide therapy for veterans. And no one was asking questions because the grants came from small, scattered veteran charities. Nobody was auditing them. The numbers were just small enough to stay off the radar, just human enough to look legitimate. I stopped for a second, staring at the glow of my screen in the dim living room. This wasn't incompetence. This was design. They hadn't stumbled into this. They had built it. And I was the linchpin they'd built it on. My military record gave them credibility. My deployment history let them backdate timelines. My last name on the family trust gave them a paper trail. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten as I pulled up another profile. Lieutenant Jaime Mendoza, U.S. Air Force, retired. He was alive. I had coffee with him 6 months ago. Yet here he was, admitted to a PTSD counseling program by Tessa. The signature was forged, but the intake interview matched his VA record almost perfectly. They had access to his service file. I leaned back, spine cold, against the wall. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. It was federal crime, and it was growing. I shut my laptop. This time, I didn't sit in the dark. I stood up, pulled the blackout curtains tight, opened a fireproof lockbox beneath my bookshelf, and retrieved my second phone, the one I'd kept since operations in Doha. Unregistered, secure line. I dialed. 3 tones. 3. Then a voice. Go. It's me. I kept my tone low, steady. You still plugged in? A pause. Then define plugged in. I've got a family-based front. Fake counseling, military identities, possibly laundering, and I think they're using me as their cover. Another pause. Then coordinates. 2 hours. Bring proof. I didn't hesitate. I was done playing daughter. I was done pretending this was about wills and heirlooms. It wasn't. It was about silence, and what people are willing to do when they think no one's watching. 2 hours later, I drove north to a decommissioned field station outside of Albany. It had once been a training site for joint cyber exercises, a concrete cube with no signage, and a rusted satellite dish still clinging to its roof like a memory. Inside, the air was dry and cold. And waiting for me was Noah Rios, former NSA signal analyst, black budget ghost, and someone I trusted with the kind of information that got people disappeared. He wore civilian clothes but moved like someone who hadn't forgotten what it meant to run. We didn't waste time. I laid out everything: the paper trail, the forged records, the names of the dead being dragged into the web. Noah whistled through his teeth. "This isn't petty fraud," he said. "You know that, right?" "I do." "This isn't even just domestic." I looked at him. He tapped his screen. "Some of these funds, they're being rerouted through holding accounts flagged in international financial crime reports, and one of the IP addresses used to file grant paperwork. It bounced through a relay node in Latvia. You're not dealing with amateurs, Ellie. You're dealing with something layered." I nodded once. "I'm not walking away." He gave me a long look, then slid a burner phone across the table. "If you're going forward, don't use your own devices again. Not even for looking up the weather." I took it. Because I knew the rules. I just hadn't realized I'd need them against my own blood. This wasn't about inheritance. Not anymore. This was espionage. And they'd used my family's name to hide it in plain sight. They used my name to hide the fraud. My name had always been my shield. Lieutenant, captain, then major, eventually commander. It had opened doors in places most civilians didn't even know existed. It earned nods in rooms where silence was the highest form of respect. And now it was smeared across documents I never signed, attached to grants I never saw, authorizing programs I never approved. They had used my name to make everything look real. Every intake form from Tessa's counseling clinic had a reference to my service. Therapist has ongoing oversight support from Colonel Eleanor Bishop, U.S. Army Ret. Some even claimed I had referred clients directly. One document included a typed testimonial from me. My name was at the bottom, complete with a digital signature that mimicked the one I used on military reports. I stared at it, the false familiarity of that signature turning my stomach. They hadn't just cut me out of the family, they had cloned me. My deployments were listed as context for why I understood trauma so deeply. My veteran status was used to apply for federal subsidies aimed at post-combat psychological care programs. One grant application referred to me as a silent partner in Hearts Forward Foundation. I laughed once, short and bitter. Silent, yes, but not like they meant. I opened a browser window and searched the grant source. It was a Department of Defense pilot fund awarded to small nonprofits supporting transitioning service members. The irony made my jaw lock. I'd once helped write the parameters for that fund when I was stationed in Arlington. I'd spent 6 months building the review system to prevent abuse, red flags, reporting thresholds, audit trails. And somehow Tessa had slipped through all of it. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe someone had helped her bypass it. That thought chilled me more than the fraud itself, because it meant the rot went deeper. I checked the approval officer on the most recent grant. The name didn't mean anything to me, Martin Elson, but the timestamp on the application was familiar. Same week I had been testifying overseas at a military ethics conference. Same week my face had appeared in DoD press material. They had timed their filing to coincide with my public visibility. Every move was calculated. Every form filed when I was most present in the public eye but least available to question it. They had turned my service into camouflage. And everyone had believed it. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the street where wind pushed leaves in lazy spirals. Everything looked normal. Sidewalks, mailboxes, a neighbor hosing down his front porch. But my world wasn't normal anymore. It was compromised. They'd used my rank, my record, even my deployment photos to make a lie look like truth. And worse, no one had questioned it. Because no one ever questions a soldier with medals. That night, I pulled out the 2 black boxes I hadn't opened since retirement, one with commendations and one with classified briefings I'd been authorized to retain under personal seal. I set the medals aside, but I opened the second box. Because now I needed more than personal truth. I needed leverage. Inside were archived operations involving psychological warfare and information laundering. One particular case stood out, Operation Hollow Signal. A joint cyber interference drill we had conducted with NATO back in 2012. In that drill, we'd mapped how state-sponsored networks use trusted community figures to build fake legitimacy, often through charities, veteran outreach, or mental health orgs. Reading it again made my skin crawl. Hearts Forward was following the same template. Tessa and Dylan hadn't built this on their own. They were following a blueprint. And I had no idea how high that blueprint reached. I called Noah again this time with the briefing code. "I know this format," he said after one glance. "This isn't amateur, this is playbook stuff. Government private contractor more likely, possibly offshore. The digital signatures used in the grant applications, I've seen that key before on a breach out of Warsaw. 3 years ago, someone sold a military-grade PDF authorization tool on the dark net. Tessa probably doesn't even know how deep she's in. And Dylan, he knows where the money goes. That's all he cares about." I nodded silently, even though he couldn't see me. Noah paused. "You ready to go public?" "Not yet," I said. "Not until I have something no one can twist." He understood. In this kind of war, the first bullet fired is often the one that gets lost in spin. I needed one clean, irreversible shot. One document they couldn't refute. One moment that would flip the entire story in a room where perception was power. So I waited. And I gathered. Because that's what they'd forgotten about me. I wasn't just a soldier. I was trained to sit in silence, trace patterns through noise, and strike once, without warning, without hesitation. They used my name to hide the fraud. Now I would use the truth to destroy it. The voice on the phone said, "Walk away." It started as a static buzz just after 3 a.m. I'd been up for hours combing through falsified medical invoices linked to Hearts Forward, each one more precise, more audacious than the last. Veterans listed as clients who had never stepped foot in Tessa's office. PTSD treatments billed for people who lived 3 states away. In one file, the therapist of record wasn't even licensed in the United States. The silence in the house had thickened, weighted by sleeplessness and blue light. I reached for my water glass when my phone vibrated once. No caller ID. I froze, then answered. A mechanical voice, distorted, genderless. "Walk away." Just 2 words, not a threat, a directive. I didn't respond. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a full minute. The call had already disappeared from the recent log. I set the phone down and opened my blinds an inch. The street outside was empty. No headlights, no parked car, just darkness and quiet. But I knew better. I'd heard voices like that before during a joint operation in Croatia when foreign interference groups tried to pressure whistleblowers. It wasn't just about fear, it was about erosion. Little moments designed to chip away your certainty, make you question your own line. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, a second call came, this time 8:27 a.m. Same hidden number, same voice. "This is not your war. Let it go." Then silence. I recorded the line that time, sent the audio to Noah through an encrypted drop. His reply came within an hour, routed through layered proxies. "Final node is a relay in Belarus. This isn't just family fraud anymore, Ellie." I didn't need the reminder. The air had already changed. Later that day, I went out for a walk. Headphones and hoodie up. I kept to the trail near the lake, where there were fewer people and fewer eyes. Just trees, water, and gravel under my boots. Halfway through, I spotted a black sedan parked across the street from my building engine, off windows, up, no movement inside. It was still there when I returned 40 minutes later. I walked past without pausing, but my fingers slid into my pocket, brushing the grip of the small Glock I'd reloaded the night before. Noah had warned me. Once you get close enough to the truth, it stops being a legal matter. It becomes an operational one. He was right. That night, I activated the surveillance net I'd quietly installed 2 years ago. Fiber optic door sensors, 2 hidden driveway cams, 1 thermal window reader. I didn't believe in paranoia. I believed in preparation. At 1:14 a.m., the driveway cam flickered once, then again. Someone had stepped onto the curb and moved back. Didn't knock. Didn't try the door. Just stood there, then left. I watched the footage frame by frame, but the face never showed. Just the outline of a body, average height, average build, nothing identifiable. Except one thing. A slight limp in the right leg. Dylan had torn his ACL senior year of college. I closed the laptop, hands steady but slow. I didn't know if it was him, but I knew what it meant either way. They were watching, and they were getting nervous. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under the front door. No stamp, no envelope, just a single sheet of printer paper typed in bold sans serif font. "You've made your point. Stop now or we take what's left." No signature, no need. because I understood exactly what they were trying to say. It wasn't about leverage anymore. It was about deterrence. But they didn't understand what I'd already lost: my family, my name, my place in the only home I ever returned to. There wasn't much left to take, and that made me more dangerous than they realized. I scanned the letter, filed it digitally, and burned the paper in the kitchen sink. The flame curled the edge in silence. No fanfare, no drama. Just one quiet final choice: I wouldn't walk away. Not now, not ever. Because some battles aren't about survival. They're about the simple, brutal refusal to be erased. They didn't know who I used to be. I didn't always wear medals. Before the promotions and briefings, before the formal uniform and the salutes, I was just another nameless officer in a dark room watching screens. No one else had access to tracing signals buried beneath layers of encryption. My specialty wasn't combat. It was invisibility. For years, I hunted systems no one could see: financial tunnels used to fund insurgent cells, encrypted networks that hid arms deals behind fake nonprofit fronts, digital ghosts whose only mistake was underestimating how long I could wait. That was before I made commander, before I went public, before they turned my silence into absence and my absence into accusation. And now here they were, my own family, playing with fire in a structure I helped design. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought I'd gone soft. They were wrong. That week, I activated an old protocol, a data containment framework used in surveillance mapping during classified threat assessments. I called it Signal Lock. Not a tool you find on public servers, not even on private ones. You had to have lived in the underground of military cyber warfare to know where to find the code. I pulled the framework from cold storage and installed it across 4 ghost drives. The interface flickered to life, sterile sharp, exactly as I remembered. Noah joined in remotely. He didn't ask questions. He never did. We started mapping. We cross-checked transactions routed through Hearts Forward against overseas shell companies and grant foundations. We flagged inconsistencies in timestamps, packet behavior, and IP origin trails. We rebuilt a web of digital movement so complex even a trained analyst would have needed months to untangle it. We did it in 3 days. By the end of it, I had something concrete, a complete data trace, showing how Tessa and Dylan had rerouted nearly $1.6 million in veteran grant money through a series of front accounts, including a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands that was flagged 2 years ago for money laundering through Eastern European psychological research foundations. This wasn't sloppy corruption. This was methodical, intentional, operational, and still none of it surprised me as much as the discovery Noah made next. Ellie, he said over the secure line, one of the names attached to the shell account in the Caymans. What about it? It's not Dylan's. Then who? A pause. Then your father. I felt everything still. The cursor blinked on the screen. The air in the room felt thinner. I reached slowly toward the monitor and pulled up the document. There it was, Howard Bishop, co-signatory, filed under Elara Strategic Holdings. Same day the house was sold, same month the grant money began moving. He hadn't just known, he had helped. I leaned back in my chair, my hands in my lap, not moving. I wasn't sure what hurt more, realizing how far it went, or realizing I hadn't seen it coming. I remembered the sound of his voice growing up calm, proud, distant. He never raised it, never shouted. He didn't have to. His silence was discipline enough. He was the one who framed my first commendation, the one who shook my hand like a colleague, not a daughter, when I returned from my 3rd tour. He had always admired my composure. Now I wondered if he had simply been learning how to fake his own. I turned the screen off. The apartment went dark. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't feel. That came later. What I did do was open the second safe beneath the floorboards. Inside was a single hard drive, a backup of my operations logs from the years when I still ran point on strategic deception exercises. One folder was labeled Hollow Mirror. Inside it, counter playbooks, tactics to trace, trap, and neutralize psychological exploitation networks. It had never been used in domestic ops, until now. I copied the framework, renamed it Family Zero, because if they had used my past to build this machine, then I would use the part of me they never understood to take it down, not as a daughter, not even as a soldier, but as a ghost. The kind of ghost who never misses. What I found could get people disappeared. It started with one name, buried deep in the metadata of a fake therapy report filed by Tessa's foundation. I found a strange string, Arden International Clearance Liaison. I blinked. Arden wasn't a charity. It wasn't even public-facing. It was a flagged intelligence vendor I'd encountered once in a secure briefing on hostile private actors operating in cyber defense gray zones. They didn't advertise. They didn't issue press releases. But they had been quietly linked to the destabilization of 2 Eastern European energy networks and the leak of military contractor data from 3 allied states. And now they were hidden in my family's paper trail. I sent the file to Noah without comment. 3 minutes later, his voice hit my ear sharp cold. This isn't just laundering, Ellie. This is data extraction. What kind? Clearance-linked identities, deployment rosters, access points. He paused. They're pulling veteran credentials tied to top-level systems. My chest tightened. You're saying they're not just stealing money? No, they're stealing access. It hit me all at once, every application filed under my name, every forged reference to my military record, every moment Tessa mentioned me in her counseling blurbs. She wasn't just using me to look legitimate. She was using me to open doors, digital ones, security-linked ones, the kind of doors that hold national secrets behind them. I stood up from my desk, heart steady but heavy, walked to the window, watched the same black sedan cruise by my street for the 3rd time in 2 days. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was espionage, and it was using my face as its clearance badge. I called Noah again. We need to isolate the breach pattern. If they're spoofing veteran credentials, we need to know how deep. He was already ahead of me. I ran a diagnostic on DoD contractor access logs using the stolen identities. You know what I found? What? There were 3 anomalous pings to Tier 3 systems. One tried to access internal comms between defense subcontractors. Another probed specs on encrypted radio equipment. And the third, he paused, was traced to a base in Nevada. Site designation redacted. I didn't need the name. I already knew the place. I'd worked there once. A dryland outpost with no signage, no press, and nothing on the books. And someone using my family's web of lies had just tried to breach its perimeter. My stomach went cold. It wasn't Dylan. He wouldn't know where to begin. It wasn't Tessa. She was just a functionary, which meant someone else was behind them. A handler, a buyer, maybe both. I walked to my gun safe, entered the code, pulled my Glock. Not out of fear, but because the line between civilian and combatant had just disappeared. There's a point in every operation when things stop being hypothetical. This was that point. I spent the rest of the night building a forensic map, tracing IP addresses, time zones, data pulses. I followed the trail through Poland, through a proxy in Luxembourg, through a compromised refugee medical clinic server in Lisbon. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. But they'd made one mistake. They came too close to someone who still knew how to trace ghosts. At 4:42 a.m., I found it. A name embedded in an authorization file, M. Silivenko. It meant nothing to most people, but I remembered it from a closed-door Pentagon briefing 5 years ago. An off-books dossier describing a Russian-born private contractor turned data mercenary. He didn't work for a country, he worked for profit. And now his tag was linked to a system that bore my name. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a family betrayal. This was a breach of national security, and I was the unwitting asset they'd built it around. For a moment, I let that settle. The weight, the insult, the clarity. They had used my bloodline to access the vaults I once protected. But they hadn't planned for this part. They hadn't planned for me to survive the fallout and still be watching, still be digging, still be capable. This was the part they always missed about ghosts. We don't knock. We wait. And then we dismantle everything. I confronted my parents. One last time. I didn't plan to go there. Not that night, but after hours buried in breach maps, in packet trails pointing toward private mercenary networks, using my name as a key, I needed something real. Not digital, not theoretical. Just one moment of eye contact. One answer. So I drove. I parked across the street from the house I had grown up in, the same one Dylan had gutted, staged, and resold under Alara Holdings months earlier. But tonight the porch light was on again. Not a contractor, not a stranger. Them. My parents. I knocked twice. Firm. Deliberate. It was my mother who answered. Vivian Bishop, once the woman who clipped roses every Saturday and placed a clean dish towel over my hands when I came home from deployment. Like I was still her daughter, still someone breakable. She blinked when she saw me. Eleanor. Her voice cracked around the syllables. I need 5 minutes, I said. And I need Dad there too. She hesitated, glanced over her shoulder, then stepped back. I entered slowly. The house had changed, modern furniture, new rugs, a glass coffee table where there used to be wood. But the air still smelled like lemon oil and old books. Howard was already standing by the living room window, hands folded behind his back like he used to during Sunday sermons. Always still, always neutral. He didn't speak as I entered. I stood at the edge of the room, didn't sit. I know everything I said. No preamble, no explanation, just the truth. I know about the shell accounts, the stolen identities, the grant money routed through fake nonprofits. I know about the security breach attempts about Arden International. And I know you're listed as a co-signatory, Dad, on an offshore account connected to a hostile actor flagged by federal systems. No one moved. My mother's hands began to tremble. She clasped them tighter. My father looked at me. His face didn't flicker. I stepped forward. Just once. Tell me this wasn't just about Dylan. Still silence. Tell me you didn't sign away your daughter's name to help fund a laundering network you didn't even understand. My mother's voice came first. Soft. Cracked. We thought we were protecting him. I stared. What she couldn't meet my eyes. He came to us, she said. Said he was in over his head. That he needed a way out. That there were people involved, and if he didn't pay them, it would come back on the family. She paused, breath catching. We thought we were helping. By erasing me, I asked, voice steady. You were always far away, Eleanor, she whispered. Even when you were home. You were different after the second tour. Colder. Harder. We didn't know how to reach you anymore. That hurt. More than I expected. Because I'd always thought I was protecting them by staying away. By not showing them the nightmares. The classified weight. The cost of what I carried. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved. Say something, I said. His jaw clenched once. Family is complicated, he said, voice low. And Dylan was still here, still present, still trying to build something. And I wasn't, I asked. Because I didn't bring casseroles and show up for birthdays. He didn't answer. So I gave them what they never gave me. Honesty. Dylan's not just in over his head. He's in with people who would burn this entire country if it paid enough. He's not protecting the family, he's selling it. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't deny it. And that was enough. I didn't come here to rage. I came to make sure they knew. That when the next part happened, when the arrest came, when the headlines exploded, they couldn't pretend to be surprised. I turned to leave. My mother reached out, fingers grazing my sleeve. We never wanted it to go this far, she said. I pulled gently away. It already has. At the door, I paused. I'm not coming back here, I said. Not after this. But you should know something. They waited. I didn't become distant because of the military. I became distant because I learned how silence works. I learned what it sounds like when the people you love stop looking for the truth. And then I left. Outside, the air was colder than before. But for the first time in weeks, I felt warmer. Because the weight of pretending was gone. They knew. And soon, so would everyone else. I showed the judge just one page. The courthouse felt smaller than I remembered. Muted walls, fluorescent lights, the distant hum of a security scanner. I had worn the uniform not out of pride, not for the press, but because it reminded me who I was long before this fight began. I took my seat without a word. Dylan was already there, flanked by his attorney on one side and Tessa on the other. Her hair was perfectly curled. His jaw was clenched, eyes focused straight ahead. Neither of them looked at me. My parents sat 2 rows behind them. My mother clutched a tissue she didn't use. My father's expression was unreadable, too still to be innocence, too still to be shame. The judge entered. We stood. And just like that, it began. Dylan's attorney went first. She painted me as a once promising officer who had lost her grip. A woman allegedly consumed by paranoia and distance. She quoted half emails, took deployment logs out of context, implied I had grown unstable, unpredictable. She withdrew from the family, the lawyer said, then returned demanding control. I didn't flinch. I had heard worse in war zones, in briefing rooms, from men with guns and men with pens. When it was my turn, I didn't defend myself. I stood slowly, reached into my case, and removed a single page. Your Honor, I said, voice even. I have one document to submit. I believe it will change the scope of this hearing. He raised an eyebrow, then motioned me forward. I crossed the room, slow, deliberate, every footstep a statement. When I placed the page before him, he adjusted his glasses and began to read. The shift was immediate. His mouth pressed into a tight line, his brow furrowed. His hands gripped the edges of the paper just slightly tighter. He read it twice. Then he looked up. Close the doors, he said to the bailiff. No one in, no one out. The room froze. Behind me, I heard chairs creak. Tessa whispered something sharp. Dylan's fingers twitched. The judge turned to his clerk and spoke quietly, then to the bailiff again. Contact federal liaison. Now. There was no gavel bang, no shouting. Just the quiet, irreversible shift in temperature that only happens when the truth finally lands. The courtroom doors shut. Locks clicked into place. Dylan turned to me then finally. His face had gone pale. What did you do? He muttered. But I said nothing, because I didn't have to. The document spoke for itself. A full digital trace of the fraud ring signed and sealed by an independent cybersecurity auditor. Names, timestamps, routing codes, offshore accounts. A direct link from Tessa's foundation to Ardent International and its recent attempts to breach classified systems using stolen veteran identities, including mine. The judge turned to face the room. Mr. Bishop. Ms. Bishop, he said quietly. You are being detained under federal suspicion of financial fraud, identity theft, and attempted breach of national defense systems. Tessa gasped. Dylan stood too fast, knocking his chair over. 2 agents entered through the side door, silent, efficient. They moved quickly, cuffs clicked. Tessa began crying loud and shaking. Dylan looked at me one last time. His lips moved, but I didn't read them. I had already heard enough. They thought I would stay silent. The sound of handcuffs isn't what the movies make it out to be. No loud clicks, no metal echoing off walls, just a soft, deliberate snap. One loop at a time, clean, final. I didn't watch them the whole way out. I didn't need to. Tessa kept sobbing, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she shook her head over and over like denial might undo steel. Dylan didn't say a word, not to the judge, not to the agents, not even to her. He just walked stiffly, his jaw locked, eyes forward. But he looked at me once. Just once. And for the first time since this began, I didn't see arrogance or fury. I saw defeat. Not the kind that comes from losing. The kind that comes from realizing the war was never yours to win. The courtroom emptied slowly, stunned into silence. Reporters had been barred from entering, but they'd been waiting outside. I could already hear the distant click of camera shutters, like distant artillery warming up. I gathered my folder. My hands were steady. My breath was calm. The judge called me back before I reached the door. Colonel Bishop, he said, would you like to make any statement for the record? I turned. Met his eyes. No, Your Honor. The evidence speaks for itself. He nodded slowly. There will be federal inquiries after this. Possibly closed door, possibly not. I understand. He paused. Then softer, almost with respect. You didn't have to bring this forward the way you did. I held his gaze. Yes, I did. Outside the hallway felt too bright, too clean, too separate from what had just happened inside that room. I paused near the entrance as agents escorted my parents out the back. They weren't handcuffed. They wouldn't be. Not yet. Not unless new charges were filed. My mother didn't meet my eyes. My father did. But there was nothing behind the look. No remorse, no gratitude, not even anger. Just quiet recognition. Like he finally saw me not as his daughter, but as a threat he hadn't planned for. A few steps away, a young VA officer waited for me, sent on behalf of the Federal Protection Team. I've reviewed your file, she said. Your exposure helped us lock down 5 pending fraud investigations. We're coordinating with the Department of Defense now. Good, I said. Do you want security detail? No. She hesitated. You're sure they're not the ones watching anymore? She didn't ask what I meant. Smart girl. I left through the side entrance. Avoided the cameras. Avoided the noise. The wind had picked up. The courthouse flag rippled high against a gray sky, and I paused for a moment beneath it. Not out of patriotism, out of memory. I thought of the first day I put on the uniform, how tight the collar had felt, how young I'd been, how convinced I was that service would insulate me from the betrayals of ordinary life. I was wrong. But I wasn't broken. They thought I'd stay silent, thought I'd take the shame quietly, that I'd walk away like the problem, that I'd let them write my story with their lies, while I buried the truth for the sake of peace. But peace isn't the absence of noise. Sometimes peace is what comes after the explosion when the air clears and the liars are finally gone. Sometimes peace is earned in silence, but never through surrender. What they said broke me more than the lawsuit. I didn't plan to speak to them again, not after what had happened in that courtroom, not after the agents, the evidence, the quiet orders passed hand to hand under federal seal. But life doesn't always ask what you're ready for. 3 days later, I received a call from the county health liaison. My parents had been placed under temporary observation stress-induced conditions, they said. No arrest, no formal charges, not yet. Just 2 elderly citizens suddenly stripped of the empire they had signed away piece by piece. Do you want to see them? The liaison asked. I almost said no. I almost hung up. But something in me, call it discipline, call it duty, said yes. The facility was clean, too clean. Beige walls, low ceilings, air that smelled like lemon disinfectant and cheap linen. A nurse escorted me to the private family room. They were already inside. My father sat by the window staring out over the empty parking lot. My mother sat beside a table, hands folded like she was praying but couldn't remember the words. Neither of them looked up when I entered. I waited. No one spoke. Then my mother finally lifted her eyes. I suppose this is what winning feels like, she said quietly. There was no bitterness in it. Just hollowness. I pulled out the nearest chair but didn't sit. It was never about winning. She nodded like she already knew that. Then came the words I didn't expect, soft, breathless, broken. We just wanted him to be someone. I said nothing. She repeated it this time as if explaining to herself. We just wanted Dylan to matter. And there it was, not an excuse, a confession. They had pinned everything on him, not because he deserved it, not because he earned it, but because he was the only one left they could shape. The one who stayed. The one who smiled at the right time, who never challenged their decisions. Who played the part of the dutiful son while stealing from veterans and laundering blood-soaked money behind their backs. They didn't protect him because he was good. They protected him because he was convenient, because he didn't threaten the illusion. I mattered, I said softly, even when I wasn't here, even when I didn't fit your story. My mother looked away. My father finally turned toward me. What you did ruined everything. No, I said. What I did revealed everything. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, I saw something that hurt more than anger, more than betrayal. I saw disappointment, but not in me, in himself. They hadn't just lost a daughter. They had built a life so fragile it collapsed the second one. Truth walked through the door. I stood, straightened my coat. I won't be back, I said. But you should know this wasn't revenge. It was accountability. I walked to the door, paused once, turned back only long enough to finish what I needed to say. Family is supposed to be the people who fight for you when no one else does, not the people who make you prove you're worth loving. Then I left. Outside, the wind was colder than I remembered, sharp across my face, clean in a way that scraped but didn't sting. I didn't cry, not that day, because there was no sadness left, only space. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly how I would fill it. Saving others was also how I saved myself. The first check I wrote was for $10,000. It wasn't much, not compared to the millions that had passed through Dylan's network. But it was clean, and it was mine. I used it to fund the first office space for Sentinel Harbor, a quiet room above an old post office. 2 desks, 3 laptops, and a line of code that read, Protect those who protected us. No fanfare, no press release, just a name and a mission. We offered legal help to veterans who didn't know they were being used. Cyber audits for anyone whose benefits were being rerouted without consent. identity recovery for the ones who'd been buried beneath paperwork they never signed. And one by one they came, some with shame, some with anger, all of them with that same question in their eyes. Do I still matter to someone? The answer was always yes. Sometimes I stayed late, just to walk the halls, to hear the printer hum, to hear someone in the conference room explaining how to rebuild credit, to feel the small, steady pulse of something that wasn't about loss or silence or survival. It was about repair. Some of the agents who once worked under me came back quietly off the books. Old friends, former adversaries turned allies, people who understood what it meant to be broken and still keep moving. We weren't trying to save the world, just pieces of it. One life at a time. I still get letters, some typed, some handwritten. Most begin the same way: you don't know me, but because of you. I keep every single one in a drawer beside my medals, because the truth is, those words mean more. More than any court ruling, more than any press headline, more than being proven right. They mean I kept something no one could take from me, not my family, not the system, not the lies, my will to fight, to serve, to matter. The world hasn't stopped turning. The noise hasn't quieted. The scars haven't faded. But I found something in the stillness between them. Peace not as surrender, but as knowing exactly who I am and who I'll always be. Because sometimes the loudest victory isn't the one they clap for. It's the one they never saw coming. The one that grows in silence and stays.